At a time when so many of the difficulties we face are truly global, such as climate change, conflict, terrorism, and HIV/AIDS, the United Nations is as relevant today as it has ever been. It's the only organisation in the world that brings representatives of almost every nation into the one room. This occurs once a year at the UN's New York headquarters and is the United Nations General Assembly. The United Nations Youth Association of Australia, or UNYA, is a non-profit community organisation run for young people, by young people, and dedicated to raising youth awareness of the United Nations. In 1999, UNYA proposed the need for an Australian youth representative to the United Nations General Assembly, to the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. Thankfully, this proposal was successful, and in 2007, I became the 9th Australian youth representative to the United Nations. My name is Groom, and I'm a 24-year-old from Hobart, Tasmania. I'm an economics law student at the University of Tasmania, but not a particularly good one, a keen athlete, a footy player, and an active Red Cross volunteer. I've always had a strong curiosity for the world we live in. I guess my interest in the United Nations stemmed from this. As a 16-year-old, I began writing letters to senior UN officials to see if any of them were interested in having an eager teenager around the office. Not surprisingly, they weren't that keen. So, in 2005, after 2 years of uni, I took some time off my studies, packed my backpack, and moved to Geneva, the European headquarters of the UN. I quite honestly arrived on the other side of the world with no plan, just a bit of enthusiasm and a few goals. After a string of good luck and some amazing support from a fellow Australian, I finished up studying international policy at Kofi Annan's old university, health policy at the World Health Organization, and interning at the UN Environment Programme. But 2007 provided a very different opportunity, the enormous challenge of taking the opinions of Australian youth to the world stage. My role, in a nutshell, is representing all Australians aged between 15 and 24 at the United Nations. But it's a lot more than that. Essentially, I'll be travelling around a lot, hearing a lot of ideas, and I guess not only communicating those ideas to the United Nations, but also to government. I don't know if it's an achievement yet. It'll depend on how I go towards the end of the year, but certainly it's a dream. It's something I first found out about it about 3 years ago, and as soon as I saw the role, I thought I'd love to do that. And I'm amazed that I managed to get it in the first place. But yeah, certainly it's something that I'm just enjoying so much every day. The first phase of being Australia's youth rep to the UN is what I like to call the listening tour. I embarked on a 5-month, 33,000 kilometre journey of consultation. It involved crisscrossing every state and territory, visiting 34 cities and towns, and speaking with over 4,000 young Australians. I've had some very diverse audiences, from remote Aboriginal communities to school kids in the middle of Melbourne. So it really does depend. But in terms of issues, I'd have to say that the environment and climate change is one that just keeps on coming up again and again. And for me, I think it's really important that we understand as young people that we can do something about it ourselves. We don't need to sit back and complain and rely on government.
So what then, in a snapshot of what message will you be sending to the United Nations on behalf of Australian youths?
I guess there are a range of issues that young people are really concerned about. Starting on the international side of things, I'd say climate change is definitely number one, and that'll obviously be a focus of this year's General Assembly, so that ties in nicely, and certainly be pushing young people's opinions on that issue. Also poverty. But then locally, a lot of issues just like having young people's voices heard. I think a lot of young people there can sometimes be a bit of a communication gulf between the opportunities that young people are after and those that are getting to our leaders. I have this really nice leather-bound book with me, and when I go around, I just give it to a lot of school kids and whoever I'm talking to, and just get them to write their thoughts about their life, or about world issues, or about ideas they might have. And one thing that I will do, and I promise everyone this, is I will be meeting with the Secretary General, and I'm going to present this book to him. So I guess that's just a symbolic thing to allow young people to make sure that their voice is heard on the world stage. Then came New York. My time was split into two distinct roles. assisting the Australian government negotiate and report on UN resolutions, and getting together with the other 20 or so youth representatives from around the world to provide a collective voice for the world's youth. Two other key highlights were, firstly, negotiating a youth resolution entitled Youth in the Global Economy, promoting youth participation in social and economic development. The UN Youth Unit describes this as the strongest youth resolution in the UN's 62-year history, and I can say that at least 1/3 of the text was dreamed up during many of the late-night idea sessions we had as a team of youth representatives. Secondly, meeting with the Secretary-General, Mr. Ban Ki-moon. We were so impressed that he not only found the time to see us, but that he was so keen to hear our thoughts on a range of issues. And yes, I did make sure he received my book full of the thoughts of so many young Australians. Then came my speech to the General Assembly. Mr. Chair, as Australia's youth representative, I feel privileged to address you today on behalf of 3 million young Australians. This was an extraordinary experience. It really was the culmination of months and months of travelling around, hearing exactly what people wanted to tell the UN. The thing I was most proud of was that it wasn't like any of the speeches you normally hear in that room. It wasn't policy speak. It wasn't language tailored for UN processes. It was a collection of real stories and real ideas from real young people from all over Australia. It was personal. This is why I felt it had real impact. Mr. Chair, when visiting an isolated Indigenous community, I met a 10-year-old boy. He told me a powerful story of two trees. The first stands in the backyard of his home and has no branches. Tragically, these branches were removed after a sibling used the tree in an attempt to take his own life. Yet, this boy's focus was on a second tree, one that stands at his school, full of life, with healthy branches. He described this tree as happy as he beamed with one of the brightest smiles imaginable. These two trees provide a powerful metaphor to describe young people. We are like the branches of a tree which, through a combination of education and engagement, are empowered to flourish like those at this boy's school. Unwavering optimism, like that of the young Indigenous boy, is a powerful characteristic of being young. We are using this spirit and energy to put our stamp on the world. From our active volunteerism to our responsible consumerism, our unprecedented environmental awareness to our sense of community, we are making our opinions count. We feel a sense of urgency and we want to be empowered to take action ourselves. Help us to ensure the branches of youth flourish, and we will help you to create a brighter and more united world. Thank you. This speech was not only heard in that room, it was televised on UN TV and shown in Australia on Sunrise, SBS World News, Sky News and several other TV programs. Excerpts were printed in The Australian and the Sydney Morning Herald. I really felt this moment was part of a small but significant step forward for youth representation at the UN. Hopefully this is just the beginning. I can foresee big things happening with this position over the coming years. But unfortunately, there are still too few young Australians involved in UN processes. Please, if you're aged between 15 and 24, get out there and apply for this extraordinary position. In the meantime, write to your local politician and tell them your ideas about the world. Get involved with ANYA and maybe even think about turning up to a UN office somewhere in the world and harass them until they give you something to do.
So, young people around the world, here's a representation of the young people who came to the United Nations to participate in the General Assembly meetings in 2007. You have a place here too, and we encourage you to try and do everything possible to get your national youth councils to nominate youth representatives to come to the United Nations and have a voice in the international debate on issues that affect not only young people, but your communities as a whole. For those who were with us this year, we thank you for your participation, and we look forward to more participation next year. Thank you very much.